Hey guys, this is Gary Baumgarten, and many of you know me as Reporter Gary here on YouTube, and I'm here in my hometown, Motown, Detroit, Michigan, and I decided to swing by the gate here, one of the gates here of the General Motors Hamtramck assembly plant where the UAW workers are on strike. This is the same area, by the way, where both Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren rallied with the troops, so to speak, out here. And I happen to run into an old colleague of mine, Paul Eisenstein, who runs the Detroit Bureau. His website covers the automotive industry. And I said, Paul, since we're both out here, can I talk to you about what's going on here? And you graciously said yes. And I'm so happy that we have this reunion and you've agreed to talk to me about what's happening behind you.
It's good to be with you. It's an interesting place to be as well.
It is an interesting place to be. So here's what I don't understand. I've been gone for a while, but we've had relative peace between the UAW and the Big Three for decades now. They started with this quality as job one, where they kind of worked hand in glove to make sure that the auto industry would succeed and they could save their jobs. They saw that as a common denominator, good for both the industry and for the workers. What changed? Why are these folks out here on the picket line today?
Well, this is the first strike by facing any of the Detroit three automakers, General Motors, Fiat Chrysler, or Ford Motor Company in well over a decade. So this is a very distinct turnaround from what we saw for a number of years. You may recall that there was all this sort of cooperative spirit between the automakers and the UAW. But you have a lot of things happening right now that have changed the tone. And just real quickly, one of those is the fact that General Motors earned about $8 billion last year. And a lot of these workers feel that, hey, wait a second, remember all those concessions that we gave before you guys were put out of business to help you come out of bankruptcy? Where's our share, especially considering how much the pay and benefits have increased for executives such as Mary Barra, the CEO?
How does this translate to the other two companies, given that usually when there's a strike target, it's to set the tone, at least historically it has been, for contract talks with the other two?
Well, it's interesting, just the word strike target was something that the UAW banned for many years. These were negotiating deadlines. It was a very, very strong change. The idea being, let's try not to set the mindset to go towards a strike. Now we have one here. And I'll tell you what, I would be surprised if there wasn't at least the threat of a real strike at one or both of the other companies. And that's the other reason why things have gone so bad here. You may recall, if you read the headlines over the last few months, really over more than a year, there's been a corruption scandal roiling what had been for many decades considered the most incorruptible of American major unions, the United Auto Workers Union, based here in Detroit. We now have, I believe, the 11th person indicted, and something like 8 of them have now either been found or pled guilty. And this is a problem. These include a lot of mid to senior level executives within the union, and we've had FBI raids on 2 of the homes that involve current and former presidents. But why does that matter? Because a lot of the union members, including probably, if you ask some of the folks behind me, are walking around saying, we don't trust our negotiators any more than we trust the company. That's a bad situation when you're talking about labor negotiations.
I'm sure the UAW is also looking forward to changes in the industry. I remember the big one when I was still here that really struck me is when they brought in the robotics.
Yes.
I remember when I was working at WWJ, they had Byron McGregor, the late great Byron McGregor, doing live reads of ads for robotics. And they were just really targeting not our general audience, but certain decision makers. And I
absolutely.
said, this is horrible. Don't you realize that UAW workers are listening to this on our air, and our guy is on the air shilling for robotics that could put them out of business, out of jobs. And now I'm wondering, with the retooling that's going on, they're moving toward electric cars, how that's going to affect these union jobs.
Well, the UAW and the automakers here in Detroit are in between that classic rock and a hard place. When you think about it, when you and I both started covering the business, it was pretty much Detroit ran the show. At one point, GM had almost 60% market share. And even by 1980, they were still well up into the 40s. Now, GM alone is 16 or so, 17% of the market, and dropping. They have got to compete with Korea, with Japan, with Europe. And by the way, many of those companies now operate plants here in the United States where they're loaded with robotics. They don't have unions. They have much more flexibility, and that means they can drop their costs. And in many cases, they'll argue they have better quality and so on and so forth. So the companies know they have to compete. And in fact, during that period of labor peace, the unions accepted a lot of that. But the reality is, you are seeing a very sharp cutback in membership. You want to hear a statistic that'll blow your mind?
Sure.
Go back to the early 70s when Detroit dominated and you had the UAW membership at General Motors alone in the United States, over 600,000. You want to know what it is right now?
I'm afraid to ask.
About 48 or 49,000. So you are down, 85%? Something like that, 90% in the rank and file at General Motors. And with other things happening, still more productivity and less complicated to build EVs coming, you're now looking at the possibility that even if they got more market share, even if sales went up, they might have fewer jobs.
A lot of people wouldn't necessarily know this, but Paul Eisenstein, your website is the Detroit Bureau. It's talking about the automotive industry, but you're very astute when it comes to politics in the country. You and I discuss politics all the time,
yes,
online especially, since we're not geographically close to one another. But I'm wondering, these plants that are on strike, they're in the swing states, and the president was very successful in this state, this state, which went Republican in the last presidential election.
Barely, but yes.
But they did. He was able to speak to Joe Lunchbucket, as I like to call it, the hardcore trade unionists who felt that the Democratic Party had taken them for granted, and they voted Trump. Is this strike some kind of a bellwether about the general election, which I know is a long way away, but you've been talking to the strikers.
It's very interesting when you look at the politics of what's going on here right now. As you said, you look at the states that have major GM and Big Three plants, and they were, to a large degree, swing states and could be in 2020, because as you know, Texas right now is starting to be considered a swing state, and there's a big GM plant down there in Arlington, Texas. So both the Democrats and Republicans, both in Congress and of course both the president and the candidates, know how important these talks and the ones with Ford and Fiat Chrysler to follow will be. A lot of these workers, if you asked them, I would expect at least some of them voted for Trump. Yet, in many cases, they would still be talking many of the same games and gains, if you will, that the Democrats had talked to for many, many years. UAW members have been more willing to swing ever since the Reagan era than many other people in the metro areas. So whoever can win them back may control who goes into the White House the next time. But that's going to be difficult, and that's why you're even though you have a supposedly pro-business president with Trump, and in this situation, in many ways, he's trying to talk to the workers even more than the companies.
Paul Eisenstein, I wanted to just ask you one other aspect of all this, and that is the trickle-down effect of this. The suppliers are not producing parts like they were before because the lines are idled. So how does this affect the consumer, people who have GM product cars when they take it in for service?
Well, if you don't mind, I'm going to hit this on two different ways. Let's talk about the impact in general to the country. All right. The number I've been hearing is about $90 million a day losses by General Motors. We're out, we're in the ninth day right now? So, you're talking about closing in very quickly. By the end of this week, it could be $1 billion in losses by General Motors. And for workers, of course, you're talking about making $50,000, $60,000 or so with benefits down to $300 in strike benefits. They've even lost the health care copay from the companies, right? You're going to feel it in the state very, very quickly. Michigan is going to get hit hard by the loss of taxes, by businesses that won't be able to get some of the dollars that, never mind the company, but of course the workers spend. And then you have the national economy, the potential impact on that. We've seen manufacturing weaken, and there's been some concerns about the health of the U.S. economy. If this continues, the impact on all of us, forget whether we're workers or we own a business, could be severe in a short order. Now, as to individual consumers, GM built up a strong inventory going into this, about 77 days supply, more than 2 months. That should be enough to take care of a short strike. If this starts going into a month, you're going to find some of the more popular vehicles out of stock at GM dealers. But you don't have to wait that long, because the reality is, if you talk to service station owners, collision shop owners and all, people who sometimes need to get a part for a banged up fender or a recall or what have you, they're already finding that they can't get parts because the GM warehouses are already shut down.
Does this also affect the other big three, the other two of the big three, because they provide parts, some of them, for all three manufacturers?
Yeah, you're going to very quickly find that some GM supplied parts, not as much as in the past, but some GM supplied parts may be in short supply at their competitors. And also, you just have the general concern about where things are going to go in very, very short order for just about anybody who has to deal with General Motors. And that includes suppliers who may also have to cut back, and that could affect some of their other customers as well.
So final question, if you had to look into your crystal ball, Paul Eisenstein, how long will this last? And at the end of all this, is everybody going to be a loser? Or will somebody be able to say this was worth going out?
I don't know what's going to come out of this in the end. It's really going to be a case of who's going to blink, or whether, like two battered prize fighters in the ring who wind up after as they approach the end of the 15th round with no clear winner, they just sort of lie on each other and continue to take punches until one of them falls to the floor. That's what worries me, that this could be a 15-rounder.
They're both concussed using your example. They're both brain damaged using your example. So this could be critically bad for both GM and for the UAW.
It could be bad for both sides, and again, it could lead. Well, if the workers at the other companies say, "What did they get out of this? It's not worth striking," it might mean that we are able to find solutions without strikes at Ford and Fiat Chrysler. On the other hand, it could lead to people being so angry that we see 2 more strikes even after this one is settled.
Well, this is a story that's not going to end very quickly, I don't think. I really appreciate you talking to me. It was great running into you again and catching up.
It was great to see you as well.
And folks, if you like this, please give it a thumbs up. Please subscribe and write your comments below. And until next time, peace out.